We have a very special guest on the show today, Reception Perception's very own Matt Harmon. If you're not aware of Matt's work, you might have been living under a rock, okay? Because he is a one-stop shop of all things wide receivers. The stats can show what they show, but Matt's charts of he basically charts all these wide receivers, rookies, veterans, to actually show which wide receivers are actually good, right? You can have these guys who fit this role here and there, one hit wonders and all that. But like when you look at Matt's stuff, like that's really how I determine whether wide receivers are good or not. Like I trust my eyes, but I trust Matt's eyes more. Okay. So when landing spots change, situations change, quarterbacks change, you're forced to evaluate these new circumstances for wide receivers. And reception perception charting those results on the player is a huge factor in that equation. So Matt, welcome to the show once again.
Faraz, way too kind of an introduction. I appreciate you, buddy. This draft class was super interesting, and I'm glad we're getting to talk about it after the fact. When we were trying to make this show happen in terms of the schedule and all that, I said to you that I'm actually kind of glad we're doing it post-draft because then we really have like an understanding of the team these guys are going to and the roles that they might play. We certainly won't get everything right, but I think more pieces of the puzzle is super important, particularly at this position in today's NFL.
Yeah, and you've already charted these guys, right? You have an idea of what they excel at, what their deficiencies might be. You know who's who, but why do landing spots matter for wide receivers, and how much do they matter?
Well, I think they matter so much, and not even in a sense of like the typical, post-draft dynasty analysis of, okay, this guy's playing with this quarterback and this guy's playing on this offense that runs the ball at this percentage or throws the ball at this percentage, whatever. To me, obviously that stuff, of course, matters when we're trying to project for fantasy. But I think just from like a straight player success perspective, what role are they going to be playing on the team, right? That's what really matters because, again, in today's NFL, there is more available opportunity for wide receivers than ever. And that's not just from like a volume perspective. That's from like a roles that you can play on the team. Like I think coaches in today's league are more willing to meet players halfway or maybe even 3/4 of the way to get them on the field in ways that are going to accentuate their success and hide their flaws. But of course, like those positions have to be available on the team. Those positions, maybe need to be those like you got to land with the right staff. Really, that's the thing. I mean, a great example from last year's class, Rashee Rice. I don't know if we talked about him on last year, but like he did not come out well in reception perception at all. But he was playing like a completely different role than what he played in the NFL with Kansas City back at SMU. Back at SMU, he was on the line of scrimmage, outside, running like go routes and hitches, and like literally that was it. And he was also playing through a foot injury, which, of course, I think tainted some of the sample and everything like that. But the big thing there is when he gets to Kansas City, and I asked him about this in at the Super Bowl, like when did this become crystallized as the plan that you were going to go from what I just described there at SMU to playing inside to running like crossing routes and getting into open space? He told me right after I was drafted. As soon as I was drafted, that was the plan that Coach Reed sort of expressed to me, so he can immediately start inundating himself and like taking that role in and like the way he was going to play as a rookie and how different it was from a collegiate perspective. So, but previously for us, like 10 years ago when I started doing reception perception shoot, like maybe even 5-7 years ago, that just really wasn't going on as much as it is today in the NFL now. So that's why landing spot matters, not just because, oh, okay, great, you get to play with Patrick Mahomes. Obviously that's good, but even better is you get paired with a smart offensive coach who can like be creative in how he deploys you to, again, hide some of the flaws that are still present in Rashee Rice's game, but accentuate the strengths and give you layup routes like that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of, and as I read a lot of your profiles, there is always that little opening of, hey, like if he lands in this type of environment, he can succeed, right? Like you look at a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? He's another one of those archetypes that you're like, all right, well, if he gets placed in the right role out of the slot and does, and the coaching really accentuates what they do well and prioritizes that and has that receiver doing a lot more of what they do well, opposed to, you know, maybe a wide receiver coming in and continuing to do what they did in college in the NFL, but it wasn't something that they necessarily excelled at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I think about is, the Bills and who they ended up drafting. But you mentioned Rashee Rice, and I want to talk about the Xavier Worthy landing spot, right? The Bills really went ahead and put out the red carpet for the Chiefs to go ahead and draft Xavier Worthy, only to end up drafting Keon Coleman. But how much of a fit is Worthy with the Chiefs, like based on his skill set, right, and what he does well, and how does he complement Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown?
Yeah, first of all, I'm glad you brought up, like, when you read the profiles at reception perception, there's always kind of this like, okay, well, if he's asked to do this, this is what he can do well. And, I know that bugs some people, like, oh, you're hedging, you're just trying not to be wrong. It's like, to me, it's number one, like, I want to tell you the path to success for a player, because I want you as a reader, subscriber, listener, viewer, whatever, to sort of be able to map that out, right? Like, so that if you start seeing these signs and signals, and there were signs and signals with Rashee Rice that he was going to be used in this role, like, I want you to be able to spot those early so that you can jump on, okay, this guy actually is going to be used in a way that's going to allow you as like a fantasy player or whatever to benefit from that. And really, I just think that's what good scouts, GMs, coaches, whatever. That's what good evaluators do, is you find what players can do well and try to put them in that role. And I think that transitions us really nicely to Xavier Worthy, because look, I just talked about Rashee Rice. I think Andy Reid and this coaching staff is going to be able to do that with Xavier Worthy. Now, me personally, Faraz, I am kind of like rolling my eyes, admittedly, a little bit over like this archetype of receiver with the Chiefs, right? Like, kind of the smaller, let's get him into space type. Like, we just signed Hollywood Brown. It didn't work out really with Sky Moore. It didn't work out with McCole Hardman. It didn't really work out with Kadarius Toney at all. And like, I was in on Sky Moore, but out on Kadarius Toney, right? So it's like, I kind of want them. I would love for them to just like almost have a normal receiver, right? Like a big ball winner on the outside, like they can go beat press man coverage, because obviously that's not Xavier Worthy's game. But the Chiefs have a different team building philosophy than me, and that's fine. So on this offense, though, I do think the real life NFL impact will be huge for Xavier Worthy. I'm less certain about what he is as a fantasy player, just because you look at some of the marks in his reception perception profile. Like, there's no question that he is a better real receiver than some of these other like fast combine 40 time guys. 68.4% success rate versus man and 80.7% against zone. Those are pretty solid marks for a college prospect. You see him win down the field, 9 routes, post routes. He can also break off his routes, throttle down, decelerate, reaccelerate on curls, 78.1% success rate there. But the issues against press coverage are pretty severe. The issues in contested catch situations are pretty severe. Like, I'm normally, this following my work over the years, I'm never normally the like size guy at receiver. But the problem for a guy like Xavier Worthy is that the size does show up in 2 critical areas. Like I mentioned, press coverage, contested catch rate. And, the guys that have hit at smaller sizes recently, Tank Dell, over 80th percentile success rate versus press in college. Devontae Smith, an elite press coverage beater in college. Even Josh Downs and like Zay Flowers last year, those guys were really good press coverage beaters. For Xavier Worthy, that is an issue. So I think he is going to talk about clear out routes for days, right? Like, open things up for the volume hogs like Kelsey and Rashee Rice in this class, or in this offense. I think Marquise Brown still is going to have a pretty decent role on this team. So I could see, I could see all of these guys finishing somewhere between like 80 and 100 targets, right? Like, and nobody really truly stands out in from a fantasy perspective. But obviously, I think he'll be a pretty nice player for the Chiefs.
Yeah, Rashee Rice definitely, got the target earning label down, right? Like last year, every single game, once he started to get that, 80% plus route participation after, I think it was like week 12 or so, from that point on, he was a fantasy wide receiver 1. And now that they added Xavier Worthy, I'm looking at Rashee Rice as somebody, okay, continue to do a lot of that underneath stuff, right? After the catch type of, but I think Worthy, what he does, and then you have Hollywood, who kind of does a lot of good things, deep downfield, post routes, 9 routes and that sort of thing. And then Xavier Worthy kind of can potentially do a little bit of both, right? A little bit of underneath, a little bit of deep. right? Like based on what I've heard and what I've seen and what I've, you know, after looking at his profile, is he somebody who can win both underneath and deep, you know, with Patrick Mahomes? Because we're always looking for some. They just, you know, got rid of MVS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is he potentially going to be taking some of that down the field stuff? Do you have some confidence in him down the field?
Oh yeah, I think so, and I think he's a better downfield receiver than Marquise Brown. But it's really funny because they're sort of like similar, right? And look, Marquise Brown's only there on a 1-year deal. He could easily have a big year with Kansas City or a good year and then go cash in elsewhere. If I had to bet, even before drafting Xavier Worthy, I probably thought that was going to happen. Now I think that's definitely probably the plan here. But they're a little similar, Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy, in that you probably don't want them to play X receiver, but I think one of them is going to have to. It's probably going to be Marquise Brown just because he's a veteran. You really don't want them playing X. You probably want them playing a little bit flanker. You want them playing in the slot a little bit. They're better zone beaters than press beaters, and they win, I would say, more in like the intermediate area. But I do think Xavier Worthy is better, like in terms on the true like 9 routes, like stacking defensive backs and winning with a bit more timing there. But that's like nitpicking for Marquise Brown, who, like I said, is a solid NFL receiver. Even if he maybe isn't as good as where he was drafted, you know, maybe there's been more hype on him than maybe deserved. I think he's like just a rock solid, you know, number 2, number 3 receiver. I think that's probably what Xavier Worthy ends up being, is like kind of a rock solid 2 or 3. Do you want to spend a first round pick on that? I didn't have him ranked as a first round player. I had him ranked in the priority round 2 range, but hey, you're Kansas City, you can take luxuries. Who cares, you know, if you get him at this pick? And like I said, he is going to do a lot fundamentally for the offense, even if it doesn't show up in the stat sheet. You know, if I kind of compare this to a situation which is unfair because Jameson Williams' career has been so weird, right? He just hasn't had like a normal start to his NFL career. He really was never going to because he was coming off an injury. But we could see. And it's tough to talk about Rashee Rice right now because of the legal situation. But just hypothetically, he's on the field. These guys are on the field together. I do think it could be a very similar, like, Rashee Rice is your volume hog, like big slot crossing route receiver, and he showed you that he can beat zone coverage at a solid rate. His rookie year reception perception is going to look very similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown's rookie season from a reception perception standpoint. And then maybe, you know, you draft a vertical receiver on the outside to help that guy and open things up and kind of clear out that middle of the field that they really want to run.
I love that. All right. I want to go back and, you know, go to where I really wanted to start this conversation. A couple guys who might have got a boost because of draft capital, right after the draft. A wide receiver that I think you were pretty high on pre-draft was Florida wide receiver Ricky Pearsall. He sneaks into the first round. He goes to the 49ers. Trade rumors obviously swirling around their big, you know, their 2 big name wide receivers. Is San Francisco a sneaky good landing spot for Pearsall?
I think so. Look, like, here's the thing. If one of these 2 guys, and if I had to bet, I would say that, especially now that the first round, you know, the whole draft has passed, but as soon as the first round ended, I thought it's like, you can't trade Brandon Ayuk at this point because you've got to get like a real deal first round pick. And I think, again, someone at The Athletic wrote afterwards that, you know, if they were going to, or maybe, but it might have been Nick Wagner at ESPN. Excuse me if I'm not getting this correct, but like, basically, like, they wanted to, if they were going to trade Ayuk, they wanted to get a pick in return that was going to put them in a position to draft one of the top receivers in this draft, which probably was never going to happen, which basically means, like, we don't really want to trade Brandon Ayuk. And why would you? You can't trade Brandon Ayuk. He's too good. He's too important to the offense, and his skill set is too hard to find. I think there is still a chance they trade Debo, and, like, we'll all be talking very differently about Pearsall as both a redraft asset and a dynasty player if Debo Samuel's off this roster. I love Ricky Pearsall, man. I think it has been confusing that people have been like shocked by this pick. I had him ranked in this range. I had him ranked as my wide receiver 6 in the class. I had him ranked as a fringe first, second round pick. So it was very high on Pearsall. And it's also crazy to me, Faraz, that what do we talk about after the Super Bowl so much? Well, so much analysis was on these receivers, other than Brandon Ayuk, don't win enough against man coverage. The good defensive backs on the Chiefs were able to, like, you know, just strap up on Debo Samuel, and he wasn't able to win on his own. You know, Juwan Jennings is a nice player, but he's not like a high-end man coverage beater, right? You know, he's number 2 in the class in reception perception and success rate versus man coverage behind Odunze, Ricky Pearsall. Like, this, I think, that is a big part of why they drafted him. He's also a good fit in terms of like get him into space, great reliable hands, just going to be in the right place at the right time, which if you followed Kyle Shanahan in his history with wide receivers, that is something he really values.
Brock Purdy in 11 personnel is going to have those three guys at wide receiver. He's going to have George Kittle on the field, Christian McCaffrey on the field. He's quite the winner, isn't he? Assuming all these guys stay.
Assuming all these guys stay. And again, even if they trade Debo, it's going to be, you won't have like as many layups, right? Like true Mickey Mouse gimme layups, but Pearsall is going to get open underneath, right? Like I've said in the pre-draft process, I thought to myself, like Pearsall is a guy that could be that quarterback's best friend early on in his career and then maybe grow into like a player you throw the ball to 120 times. Maybe that's what we see here in San Francisco. Like, again, in a hypothetical world where Debo's off the roster, like, we're looking for Brandon Ayuk first on shot plays, but, like, you've got Pearsall as a slot player, and he's, like, the low read of high-low concepts, and you get the ball to him in layup situations. That's going to be key for Purdy, who does struggle under pressure sometimes. And even, again, if Juwan Jennings is your third receiver, I think that's fine. I really like Juwan Jennings. I think he's a solid dirty work player.
He ends up being the fifth, right? With Christian McCaffrey there, George Kittle there. I mean, so it's a luxury right here, for all these guys. So, don't sleep on Ricky Pearsall, in rookie drafts. He might be like one of the biggest values right now in dynasty rookie drafts because I don't think people understand what the upside looks like. And on top of that, it seems very, very crowded right now. It is very crowded right now, on that offense, but still.
If we're being honest, Faraz, like from a dynasty perspective, there's not a ton of like super clean situations, at least in my opinion, right? Because and
which is why we just shoot for the talent right now, right? Things change so quickly, and I think with Pearsall, his particular ceiling is higher than a lot of people think, and he's one of my favorite values. I think so far I did two rookie drafts, and I've got him, late second round. Which is absolutely
crazy. That's crazy. That is way too low, way too low for Ricky Pearsall. I would take him much earlier than that. But yeah, I mean, just from an overall dynasty perspective, like I can get to maybe my wide receiver like 60 in my overall dynasty rankings, and then like think like I can see a path for this guy to have like a usable fantasy season. The position's very deep right now, which also makes it like not deep in a weird way. So you definitely just swing for the fences. And like if you're gonna swing for the fences with a player, why not do it with one in this offense?
Were you surprised the Bills went Keon Coleman over A.D. Mitchell?
Yes and no. Yes, from a skill set standpoint, because I think A.D. Mitchell clearly projects better as an X receiver, like a vertical X receiver, especially like a separation X receiver than Keon Coleman does. But I also wasn't surprised given just look, and I know Chris Ballard like went to bat for AD Mitchell and like awesome for him to do that. If I was AD Mitchell, I'd feel so great that I landed with the Colts, that my GM, the guy that took me, that's going to, build my career here, is willing to drop like 5 F-bombs in a 2 minutes, in a 2-minute soundbite to defend me. I'd feel great about that. But the reality is like some teams had personality concerns and whatever with AD Mitchell. And I would guess that just based off what the Buffalo Bills just went through with Steph Diggs, like they probably don't want to, they just want to get a guy in here who's going to light up the room like you've seen Keon Coleman do already.
God. Oh yeah.
Like I think that just feels better for a team that probably like, I love Stephon Diggs, like he's my guy, but like probably there was a sigh of relief when he left the team. I think just getting Keon Coleman in there from a personality standpoint, I wasn't too surprised by that. However, from an on-field standpoint, there are questions, right? Especially if he's going to play the X receiver position, because like I just don't think you can watch Keon Coleman play and not have some concerns about his ceiling as a press man coverage beater. 20th percentile against man coverage, 19th percentile against press and reception perception, but he's a pretty good zone beater, and like he has some really good qualities to his game. So like I am not all out on Keon Coleman. I think like in my pre-draft just prospect rankings, I still had him as a clear day 2 player. So he goes maybe a little bit higher than I would have taken him, but still like a fine pick again in the second round. Really good hands, works the middle of the field well. I just have a tough time, Faraz, when I look at this receiver room thinking, I feel like it could be very similar to what we talked about with Kansas City, where it's a lot of guys, Dalton Kincaid included, who are like between 80 and 110 targets. And there's just a lot of kind of like nebulous roles here, which can be good from an NFL perspective, can be bad when projecting for fantasy.
I can totally see myself, passing on Keon and redraft, getting a whole lot of Curtis Samuel. I can totally see myself doing that in redraft this year.
Yeah, well, you're talking to the right guy if you want to be validated on that decision.
100%, man. No, well, I'm actually being validated because based on how much you like him. So it goes both ways. If AD Mitchell landed in Buffalo, like I'd go so far as to say that he could potentially be their wide receiver 1 this year, right?
Yeah.
So I think it seems like what you're saying is that there is a way larger range of outcomes in Buffalo's target share pecking order now that they drafted Keon Coleman, right?
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah. Does Michael Pittman and AD Mitchell now have a chance to become one of the better wide receiver duos in the league, maybe in a couple of years? Is that possible?
I'd throw Josh Downs in there and make it a trio. I really like Josh Downs as a slot receiver, and I think AD Mitchell is like a perfect addition to this receiver room for what Indianapolis needed. It fits really cleanly together, where you've got, and so I'm going to talk to you before we got on here about our Yahoo Live draft show, and I think it went really well because we had a lot of really good pre-production meetings. In one of them, Charles Robinson was explaining to us why there was a lot of steam on the Colts might be willing to draft the other Texas receiver in Xavier Worthy at the 15th overall pick. They were really in on Xavier Worthy, and a lot of it was because of the speed element, because the way Charles explained it is they've got 2 of the 3 areas of the field covered, right?
Yes.
Like Josh Downs is down here. He's that slot receiver that works the short and intermediate area really well. Michael Pittman can do a little bit of everything, but his primary chunk is going to be in that intermediate area. But where they were really lacking was a true vertical presence. And I followed that up by saying, and what they're really lacking is like a true vertical X receiver, because Alec Pierce, he's a solid player, but I think you can do better than him at that spot. It just hasn't really come together for him from a ceiling perspective. AD Mitchell's like the better version of that, where he's going to line up on the line of scrimmage. He's a good press man coverage beater, over 80th percentile success rate versus man and press. Now, he does have some issues with timing and like running his routes against zone coverage, or I think that can be corrected. That is a teachable moment for him. But he just has rare ability to win as that X receiver. So you've got your high-volume flanker that moves around the field in Michael Pittman. You've got a slot receiver that I'm super high on in Josh Downs. And then you've got AD Mitchell as that like vertical X receiver with like really, like I said, rare traits in terms of press man coverage ability, ability to high point the ball down the field, like just flexibility at the catch point. That, man, Anthony Richardson is set up to go here, okay? Like if he's healthy, I'm going to find myself very interested in investing in this Colts offense, maybe even to a fault.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a lot of Anthony. I was gonna have a lot of Anthony Richardson regardless this year, but now that they added AD Mitchell to the fold and this wide receiver trio is looking super complete right now, I'm gonna be in on this. And then Jonathan Taylor coming back and potentially being healthier and doing his thing. Yeah, I'm gonna be high on this offense for sure. Now, you look at the upside of guys like Brian Thomas Jr., Xavier Worthy. But Ladd McConkey walks into LA as someone who can be the clear target leader for them this year. I have a few questions off of this point. The first one, would you bet on McConkey being the clear target leader on the Chargers as things stand right now with Quentin Johnson and Josh Palmer there right now? Like, that's the first question. What do you think on that?
I mean, I think something would have to go seriously wrong with Ladd McConkey for him to not be that player, because just day one, he's the best receiver on that roster. Like, and I think he's day one easily by like a country mile. He's the best separator on that roster. Quentin Johnston, from a reception perception standpoint, he's going to finish in that like Jalen Reagor zone, based on the in-season rookie report. And I'll have year 2 guys on the site here shortly, but the first part of that sample is showing a guy that's going to finish in that like clear 5-alarm fire, like territory in terms of his ability to separate. And look, they didn't do him any favors, that staff, last year. I thought it was just like somewhere between malpractice and outright insanity to draft Quentin Johnston and ask him to do all the things he showed he could not do in college, which is play X receiver, win with his routes, and like win in tight coverage. It's crazy. But when you have a profile like that, that's why it's volatile, right? For a guy in your pre-draft dynasty rankings, like it can be really risky to take a plunge on that, even if there is a possibility. Like there's an alternate scenario where he goes to another team and he's used differently and he could be a good NFL player. Maybe that happens this year, but I think if you're the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh and the GM Joe Horitz, like you just take that as all gravy. So who knows what we're gonna get from him? Josh Palmer's fine, but he's not like a great separator. Solid hands, whatever. He's like a fine wide receiver 3. Ladd comes in there as one of the best separators in this class against man and zone coverage. I find it like really hard to believe that he's not the best receiver on this roster right away.
Now, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, also target earners on the Jaguars offense with Calvin Ridley around last year. Can we expect a similar type of split this year, while Brian Thomas Jr. rounds out his skill set a little bit?
Yeah, see, I think that when we're talking about Ladd McConkey and Brian Thomas, it's good to talk with these guys together because I have them wide receiver 4 and 5 in my post-draft dynasty rankings because I think it's pretty close. But I'm going to have Ladd ranked higher in redraft this year because I think he's just – one, Justin Herbert's great. Like he needs a separator like this. And I just think Ladd McConkey's going to gobble up targets in the vertical game in the intermediate area. I think he could be the second most productive rookie receiver behind Marvin Harrison this year. Just with the way the landing spots worked out for Odunze and Nabers, they're closer to the top. So just such a clean profile for Ladd. But I would still take the chance on Thomas because from a dynasty perspective, and it's a slight chance, they're in the same tier, so whatever. But I think that Thomas is going to have an immediate role, right? Like I think he is going to stretch the field. I think he's going to run like maybe a rudimentary route tree. But I actually like that for his development as opposed to what we saw with Quentin Johnston last year where he didn't get the chance to develop slowly because guys in front of him got hurt. And like guys in front of him could get hurt here in Jacksonville. That's possible too. But like they have a target earner, like you mentioned in Christian Kirk, like a guy who's really reliable that Trevor Lawrence knows. Evan Ingram's there. Gabe Davis is Gabe Davis, but like he's another guy that they can put on the field as well. I think Thomas, like I said, he might be volatile from a rookie season perspective. Like the first few weeks might not be there, like from a production standpoint, but what he brings is sorely lacking in this receiver room, both in terms of his ability to win deep, his ability to beat press and man coverage consistently on the outside. They just haven't had a guy like that in the Trevor Lawrence era. Like Calvin Ridley really struggled with press coverage last year. I think Brian Thomas, 73.9% success rate versus press, really his most encouraging mark from his rookie year his rookie profile.
Okay, so it sounds to me like yes, there could be a potential wider distribution of targets, year one maybe.
Yes.
And similar to DK Metcalf coming in, and you mentioned him obviously with the type of route tree and skill set Brian Thomas Jr. is coming in with. We've seen DK Metcalf obviously develop right over his first couple of seasons, and he became a more complete receiver. That's the hope we're getting with Brian Thomas Jr. And the upside is obviously very, very clear with him.
DK's a great comp because he finished his rookie season with 900. He finished with 900 yards and 7 touchdowns. He averaged like over 15 yards per catch. I think that's very possible for Brian Thomas. But there were moments like early in the season, but really it was like towards the end of his rookie season and in the playoffs that year where he had like his most productive games, and like that wouldn't surprise me for Thomas too. Well, it might surprise me if the Jags make the playoffs, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was more of a slow burn like that.
And by the way, there's a reason why I didn't mention Gabe Davis. Okay.
Yeah,
just wanted to say that.
It's pretty tough for us that like the Jaguars, if you look at money allocated to positions, that they're high in terms of just money allocated to wide receivers. And when they drafted Brian Thomas, it's like, whew, thank God, because they really needed a receiver.
It's so true, man. It's so true. I was upset because, well, I don't know if upset's a strong word, but I think the only reason why they felt like they needed someone like Gabe Davis is because Zay Jones, like he has a hard time staying healthy, right? But like honestly, man, I think Zay Jones could have beat him out if he was a healthy receiver. I
No.
really believe that, to be honest. All right, so we haven't touched on the big three. We can do that real quick. You know, Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously great landing spot with Kyler Murray. I like it. I think we're good there, right? Malik Nabers.
Yeah.
I personally think the talent will take care of itself here. You know, he has a chance to get massive volume in year one. And you know, even if it's Daniel Jones at first, it's okay. Like I think he'll be fine. I do think because Romo Dunze is paired with Caleb Williams, you know, he's ahead of Neighbors in Dynasty for me at this point. If I had to choose between those two guys, kind of splitting hairs, I prefer the QB pairing, and I'm fine playing a little bit of the long game. You know, even with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen there. How much of a long game is it really going to be with Keenan Allen at this point? Do you feel any differently about those situations? Like kind of how I laid that out.
No, I think that's pretty much exactly how I feel. And yeah, like Marvin Harrison, immediate top 10 dynasty receiver, and he could be in my like tier one. I only have like 4 guys in my first tier. It's a pretty rare group there, but he could be one of those players by like freaking October, like, I mean, there's no question. He's that good. I love the pairing with Kyler Murray. I feel very similar to you do to how you do with the Rome Odunze Malik Nabers analysis. Like I had Malik Nabers ranked as my wide receiver 3 in this class pre-draft, and I have him there post-draft because like I think the landing spots are both like they're positives and negatives to this, like for Rome Odunze and Malik Nabers. So really there's no reason to change how I just thought about them as players when I'm doing my post-draft dynasty rankings. And I mean, I was so high on Rome. I really love him as a prospect. This is not a Jackson Smith and Jigba situation for a couple of different reasons. One, because he's better than Jackson Smith and Jigba, like straight up. I think the gap between, and I also think that like Keenan Allen has shown signs of decline, even if the production has still been there. Like he's not the same guy. Like, so if he is just a role player this year, that wouldn't surprise me either. Whereas like we hadn't seen those signs of decline from Tyler Lockett really until last year on film at least. So, and he's only on a 1-year deal, like, right? Like there's a chance that they sign him to an extension. That's totally possible. But still, I just think like Rome is so good. He's going to create his own opportunities. Whereas like JSN is a good player, but he's not quite there. Yeah. For Malik Nabers, like I think that he is a little bit more shielded from the bad quarterback play part than like a Rome or Dunze or even Marvin Harrison, just because of where he's going to play. I think he's still going to be an outside receiver, maybe more than he was in college, but he's not going to be like a vertical boundary X receiver, whereas that's where you do want Rome and Marvin Harrison to line up. Like if you're not, they can play other positions, but if you're not using them there like 75% of their plays, I think you're doing a disservice to them as players. Whereas Malik Nabers, you can create here, you're going to be incentivized to create more explosive plays for him from and more layup situations because of his yak ability, his run after catch ability. So I think Daniel Jones, for all of his flaws, and even Drew Lock for all of his flaws, if he gets on the field at some point, he can be directed by the coaching staff like, hey, this guy's going to literally just cross the middle of the field. All you have to do is get it to him on time and don't take a friggin' sack, which has been an issue for Daniel Jones. But I think that he is prone to the way I've been saying it is that I think he is most capable and equipped to maybe not thrive, but survive in this landing spot for now.
For now. And I think, Daniel Jones, like, we had no idea what was going to happen with his fate, right? There were a lot of rumors around the Giants potentially taking a quarterback in this draft. As soon as Darren Waller found out that they did not draft the quarterback, he went ahead and retired. So that tells you what you need to know there.
Darren's had a busy few weeks, man. So
100%. But do you see, if you had to kind of lay out what Malik Nabers' role might be at the next level, do you see him kind of playing a flanker role for the most part, out of the slot a little bit as well? Kind of getting those balls, closer to the line of scrimmage potentially, at least to start. So he could create more after the catch? Or do you see him making a lot of plays downfield? Obviously, you mentioned that he might not be that boundary receiver, that primary boundary receiver, but what kind of role do you see him playing to start?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see him doing a lot of like boundary receiver stuff. He's got an ability to beat press man coverage. Like he's a good. I'm not saying he's bad, you know. But I do think he's the least refined of these top three guys. But overall, like I still think you can trust him to win. Sort of to win in a way that where you can create those opportunities for him. Like I think that's the best way to kind of get the best out of him early on. Interesting comparison. Like I'm looking back at DJ Moore's rookie year in reception perception. And you know, I think that was a common player comparison for him. He took his lowest rate of snaps outside in his career in his rookie season, 64.5% in the games I sampled. He was in the slot on 27.9%, and he was in the backfield on 7.6%, primarily as like a motion man, right? Like not as a true running back. But you remember DJ Moore, like there were struggles early on for him like, as a route runner, like a technician. I don't think like maybe Nabers is not quite that way because he's just a better prospect than DJ Moore was. And that's like no shade to DJ Moore. He was a first round pick and a guy I really, really liked coming out of school. But while they worked him into being like more of a true route runner and like eventually, you know, DJ Moore last year played at like an all pro level as a vertical X receiver. So the development took place for DJ Moore, I think, but getting him opportunities to run after catch, that's going to be the biggest thing for Malik Nabers to kind of get the best out of him. Cause that was really, again, the plan that they took place with DJ Moore. I would expect that. And like, there's a lot of slot guys on this offense, right? But you can do things to scheme guys up in opportunities by being an outside receiver. Like think about it this way, where if I had to paint the Giants offense right now, I'd say you've got kind of Darius Slayton as that ISO receiver on the boundary as the X, right? Even if that's not the best use of him, like he can stretch the field over there. So we have him as the ISO receiver. Maybe even Jalen Hyatt takes like a big step forward and he's that guy because that's kind of how they, even though he was a speed slot in college, that's kind of what they wanted to be last year, was like an outside guy. And then, you know, on your front side where you want Daniel Jones reading the field, you've got Wandale as a slot receiver on the line and like Malik Nabers right there bunched with him as an outside receiver, but still pretty tight together. And then you can scheme a lot of opportunities for Nabers that way. And then also have like Wandale as kind of a layup option too.
I like that a lot. All right. So I want to move on to the Patriots. Many might not look at Drake May's landing spot there and loving it, but they drafted Jalen Polk. They added Javon Baker. Two guys I like as nice value wide receivers in this draft class. And then you add that to another guy that I like in Demario Douglas. And you have, I think, a decent X, Y, and Z there, potentially, right? And they also have Kendrick Bourne, right? Hunter Henry as well. So this isn't as bad of a landing spot as some may think. And this could work out, right? And this is not like the like if Bill Belichick was still there, like they would not be drafting Jalen Polk and Javon Baker. Like I feel like these are the guys that you hope that are like a team who needs value wide receivers would draft, but Bill Belichick would just draft that like 6th round wide receiver in the 3rd round who has 0 shot at starting, right? So what are your thoughts here? You know, do any of these rookies have a chance at emerging as, you know, Drake May's wide receiver 1 here sooner than later? You know, Demario Douglas did a pretty good job, you know, yards per route run, pretty good job earning targets as well out of the slot. Is he somebody we should be buying, right? You know, given the skill sets that were just added to this team, including Drake May.
I love what the Patriots did in the draft. I like taking Drake May at 3. I like the fact that they have been already kind of getting out in front of like reminding people that Jacoby Brissett is on this roster. And like, I think there's actually a pretty decent chance Jacoby could start like the first month, maybe even like 2 months of the season. Just to like, you don't want Drake May out there developing battle scars. And I think there's a chance that this offense can be better, but it's still not great, right? Like the offensive line is still an issue. I like what they did in the draft at receiver, but it is still a lot of rookies out there. And like, I would compare this to what the Packers did in the draft the last few years, which is like, let's double up at receiver because like, let's say I really love Jalen Polk and I really love Javon Baker. I actually had them graded in the same tier, which was like priority round 2 prospects, guys I wanted you to draft in round 2. They got Baker in the 4th round. Like, let's just say, for example, like Jalen Polk doesn't work out. Okay, well, what if Baker works out? You just like again, you've increased your odds there. Or what if it's again that Packers example where you take Jaden Reed in round 2 and he's a baller, and like, oh wait, Dontayvion Wicks, we took him on day 3, he's also a baller, right? Like, and so I think that situation is present for New England here, where like Jalen Polk, I think is, you said it really well, is a guy that's going to play that flanker role. He can move into the slot at times, but he's going to give you like very similar routes to like Robert Woods is a good comparison. What Puka Nacua did for the Rams last year, he's going to work that middle of the field. He's going to crossing routes and like great hands over the middle. Tough as nails player, willing to do the dirty work. Polk is kind of.
You said the P word, Matt.
I know. So don't clip. Make sure you don't clip this from the show. Well, you can do it. This is your show. You can do whatever you want. But yeah,
clip this.
Yeah, right. Listen, you wouldn't be the first. So I think that like that's the way you can see Jalen Polk developing in this offense. So I overall think he's going to be a really good player. And then, yeah, Baker is like your developmental X receiver. I don't know if he's ready to be like an instant impact guy, which is why Kendrick Bourne is important here, that I think they extended him. He can play that X receiver position. He can win against man coverage. Maybe he's the early season X receiver or the 2024 X receiver, and then Baker's ready to rock by late season 2025 just because he comes from like a wide open Big 12 offense and ran a go route on 35% of his routes. Like there's going to need to be some developmental kind of growth plan there, but overall love what they did at receiver. I'm glad you didn't mention like, well, Juju's on this roster, KJ, like who cares about these guys? Like let's get the young players developing here, like what Demario Douglas brings in the slot. So I think they've got a good plan with Drake May, and they've given him like options to grow with. Two guys I really liked from this draft.
Similar to the Ricky Pearsall situation, Jermaine Burton landing with the Bengals can work out too, paired with Joe Burrow here, right? Who knows what's happening with T. Higgins? If they end up moving Higgins, Burton can become pretty fantasy relevant quickly here, right? And now, even if T. Higgins ends up, let's say they end up finding a way to extend him and he ends up staying with the Bengals, and now you have Burton, who probably profiles as somebody who's in the slot, right? Like, how would that work out? And obviously this type of trio would be pretty nice for Joe Burrow.
Burton could be like a speed slot guy, but man, he profiles more as like an outside player to me, which my prediction is, and I'm going to say this a lot leading up to the season, I think we see Jamar Chase, if T. Higgins is on this roster, and I think he will be on this roster, I think we see Jamar Chase play like a career high slot rate this year.
Okay.
Love it. No Tyler Boyd on the roster, right? Like, T. Higgins is a pure outside guy. Jamar Chase told me at the Super Bowl, like, I want to play more slot, but I need to earn the coaching staff's trust, basically, was what he said. People can find that interview on YouTube if they want to go check it out. I think I also may have tweeted it at some point. So that was a pretty interesting anecdote. And then they draft Jermaine Burton, who is, like I said, a guy that played outside at Alabama in his reception perception sample last year. He's 4th in the class in success rate versus press. He's 3rd in the class in success rate versus man, and he wins at all 3 levels, and he wins in tight contested situations. Yeah, there's absolutely, like, if you want to play him in the slot, like, he can rip you on deep routes. I think he could be that vertical slot presence. But man, like, I was shocked that Jermaine Burton went in round 3. I thought he was going to go on day 3 based on some of the character concerns there. But this is still a fall for Jermaine Burton, because had he had like a clean off-field profile, and of course had Alabama been a bit better of a passing offense, Faraz, I think we'd be looking at like a round 1 type of talent. That's how I ended up ranking Jermaine Burton, was like a round 1 player in this class.
Man, I love that. That's interesting, man. Like, you look at CeeDee Lamb, obviously him dominating out of the slot. He could also play outside if he needed to, right? Garrett Wilson also, like, when the Jets had trouble, like, getting the ball to Garrett Wilson on the outside last year, what ended up happening, he ended up playing inside way more than I thought he would be ended up playing, right? And that ended up working out a little bit in terms of at least getting the ball into his hands, right, in that really, really shitty quarterback situation. So, in this case, man, if Jamar Chase ends up running out of the slot, like, it's gonna be nuts. He's gonna have some of the craziest mismatches, right? That we've seen him have. I've always profiled him obviously as an outside receiver, but him moving inside would be something. Okay.
23.5%. Pro Football Focus has it 23.5% of his routes from the slot. Yeah. What about even like a mean, Tyreek Hill at 37%, right? Like Justin Jefferson at 30.2% last year. Obviously you mentioned CeeDee Lamb, 58.6%. Maybe we don't get all the way to 50%, but even that boost into like the 30s or 40s, I think would be huge for Jamar Chase.
Here's the thing, like you mentioned, if Burton is that good against man and press coverage, right? Then and we know how Jamar Chase can win anyway against zone, against man, whatever. Like that would be something, man. That would be like. So would you profile Burton as a potential X there? T. Higgins working off the line a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of overlapping skill sets here.
There is. I think that what's been interesting with these receivers in Cincinnati is because like they have a very rare luxury where they have two guys that are X receivers. I think T. Higgins is more of that like classic X, and he's played. Last year is really the first year where they started to move Jamar off the ball a little bit, and they started to move him around. We saw that growth more last year, and he wants it to be more and more this year. It's tough though because their alignment data just doesn't look like neither one of them look like true full-time X receivers because they both played a little bit. But last year we saw Higgins play more as an X, Chase move around a little bit, and then you bring up Burton, who primarily lined up as an X in his perception profile. He took 82.6% of his sample snaps outside, was on the line for 70.2%. But he has like sub 200 pounds at 6 feet. Like maybe a team sees him as like a Chris Olave flanker type. I think that's right. If I had to guess, that's probably where he lines up. Like in two receiver sets in 25 and beyond, because I do think T. Higgins not going to be on this roster. I think that you're looking at like Chase as your X. And Burton as your flanker, and then maybe Charlie Jones or somebody else as your slot. But
can't forget about him.
Yeah, I mean we could, but I liked Charlie Jones a little bit as like a sleeper slot prospect.
Didn't he like lead college football in receiving yards and receptions in 2020? I think it was 2022. I think it was.
And he lined up like all the time outside, but it was very obvious that like he is going to be kind of that slot receiver in the pros.
Yeah, when they drafted him, I was like, okay, this could be the Tyler Boyd replacement.
Exactly.
It's very possible. Okay, all right. So, what do you think of the Jets reported? Well, it's not even reported anymore. They put out the videos of it. So
they put out the damn video of it.
Malachi Corley, dude, like they are obsessed. They were like they had an 8-minute video of them just trying to trade up to get him, but he ended up falling in their lap. Like, what are their plans? Like, I think they have to use Corley in a specific way, right? Because he's such a specific type of player. But it seems like, I guess it's a nice compliment to what they have at the moment, right?
Yeah. I don't know, man. To be honest with you about this, I'm a little concerned just because anytime you're talking about a player who needs to be used in a specific way, and like I like Malachi Corley, but 100%, right? Like, he took 99.2% of his sampled snaps off the line of scrimmage in reception perception. He was in the slot or backfield on 89%. You are going to have to scheme this guy in a role. Anytime we're talking about that with Nate Hackett, I'm concerned.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
there's no
I'm
trust
concerned about that. I don't trust that. And even though there are really appealing parts of his game, like I think he is definitely more real receiver than like, the Wan'Dale Robinson, Rondale Moore types. He's definitely more rocked up, right? Like 66% success rate versus man, 84.8% success rate versus zone. Those are good numbers, but obviously a lot of that comes on like a very small handful of routes, like the layup routes and stuff like that. So I think he is a gadget guy. That makes me a little concerned there. I also worry with the Jets that like, are we just penciling Mike Williams in for 17 games? I wouldn't. Okay, like I wouldn't do that. So yeah, he theoretically fits in with that three receiver set of like Mike Williams is your X, Garrett Wilson is your outside Z who moves around the formation, and like Corley is your slot, I guess. But I don't know. That to me still feels like kind of a weird receiver room.
I think the only thing that Nate Hackett knows how to do is that let's run the ball and let's have one like target funnel, like in the pass game with Aaron Rodgers, and that's it.
Which is fine, by the way. Like that could be, it could be very similar to the Packers offenses, right? Exactly. Where you have a target funnel in Devontae Adams, you have a good running game, and like, I guess Malachi Corley is Randall Cobb or like, I don't know. It's just, I thought they needed like another long-term developmental outside receiver, and I just don't think Malachi Corley is that guy.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I was so confused about why they were so hyped to get him. I mean, hopefully with the next offensive coordinator, maybe. Okay. Do you think the Panthers reach for Xavier Legette at 33?
32, because they traded into the first round to get him. Yeah, they trade up to get that fifth-year option, which, by the way, is kind of funny because it's like if he's good, he's never going to play that fifth-year option unless you're like the Cowboys and you keep screwing that situation up with CeeDee Lamb. You should get the extension done, but or I guess the 49ers with Brandon Ayuk too. So maybe I'm being a little too hard on the Panthers there, but it's definitely to me
or if you're Rashad Bateman's agent. I don't know if you heard.
Well,
I don't know if you heard about
that.
Yeah,
I've seen that. Well, if you're Rashad Bateman's agent, you don't even get him to the fifth-year option because you get it taken off. Which, tough scene there. At least Bateman, they like him enough to want to keep him on the roster, I guess. But anyways, long story short here with Xavier Legette. Yes, it is a reach to me. I didn't think he was a first round guy. I thought he was more of a day 2 player. So overall, yeah, it's a little bit of a reach. I do like what Dave Canales said right after the draft, which is all the routes that I like. If you look at Xavier Legette's reception perception profile, you're looking at a guy who wins on dig routes and slant routes, and like big post routes. That's exactly what Dave Canales mentioned right after they drafted him. Is like, we want, move him around the formation, get him opportunities crossing the middle of the field, which is real receiver stuff in today's league. That's not gadget stuff, right? Like I saw when, because I shared the Josh Norris quote, people like, oh, what about Laviska Shenault? That's what he's supposed to. I'm like, no, Laviska Shenault's not even a real receiver. So like, don't even say that in the same sentence. Legette does show you some real receiver ability, especially he's got good hands, contested catch situation, but he is raw as a route runner. Like his work against press man coverage is still a development in progress type of thing. I think that Deontay Johnson's going to be the funnel target on this offense. He's going to eat up a lot of volume there just because he's the guy that separates within the structure of the play. And like we'll see with Xavier Legette. I think I actually don't really have. This landing spot did not give me like conviction one way or another on him as a player, because I think that they're talking about him the right way, which is good, but he's still a developmental receiver. Like there's no question about that. So it's definitely a reach. I think the landing spot is fine from a usage standpoint, like deployment standpoint, but there are obviously still other questions on the Panthers offense.
You best believe I'm ending this show on a Deontay Johnson high note. Okay. Everyone, please go check out all the work that Matt does on his show. I want to give a shout out to James Coe as well, who does a lot of hard work behind the scenes and is a great co-host on the Reception Perception podcast. I got a chance to meet him and spend some time with him in Vegas earlier this year. Really great dude. And these guys have such a great thing going. So please go check it all out. I'll have all the links in the description, receptionperception.com. Okay, Matt, thank you again, my friend. I really, really appreciate the time.
I appreciate you, buddy. Always love to be able to catch up with you at any point during the NFL calendar, but especially after the draft. And this was awesome. Thank you for having me, man.
Of course, man. Thank you.